I have never thought about getting rich or having power or having the world adore me. So I want to be a gardener who keeps tending and planting shade trees for future generations that I don't need to sit under. I thought about this point also, that whether I've had a dream throughout my life, a vision that has driven the course of my own life. And the answer would be yes, but I can't tell you exactly the form of the dream throughout every part of my life. When I was a little boy, my library card was as important as a MasterCard. Remember, I was raised in the early 1930s. There was no television, there was radio, and there were books at the library. So you could read, you could go to the movies, and you could listen. So what I did is I got a new book every week and read it. And the books that I read were both fiction and nonfiction. And I read nonfiction to know more about the history of the world and the world I had not yet visited, so that I could learn more about what I was getting into. And the fiction was to help me fantasize and imagine the kind of world that I wanted, because I remember another Einstein situation where he said, imagination is greater than knowledge. For knowledge centers on the things we now know, but imagination concerns the things that we will yet have to learn and that are in the future. Imagination rules the world, not knowledge. So as a little boy, I always imagined an adventurous, courageous, exciting, hero-type life. But in those days, it was Batman and Superman and the comic book characters. And so I'm sure that I played out my different role in those set of, shall we say, comic book characters. But my vision as a little boy, I knew that inside I wanted to do something special, be something special. I developed an ability and a love for words, for reading, for writing, creative writing, and for talking, obviously. And I talked a lot, and I wrote a lot, and I read a lot over and over again. And I had an interesting childhood because my parents were arguing, and they had a very difficult life financially together, and my mother and father argued a lot. And I remember putting my pillow over my head and crying myself to sleep, and they would argue about money and lifestyle and what they didn't have and what he didn't earn and what didn't happen. And I must admit, as a child, that early vision was mostly a vision, an imaginary vision of being somebody different, not argumentative, someone happy. And I remember getting on my knees beside my bed, and I did. I said, God, guide me never to drink, never to smoke, and never to get married, because those things seem to be very difficult, because my parents were arguing a lot over the fact that he smoked and he drank a little bit and he was not successful financially and he procrastinated and he liked to relax on the weekends, and my mother had visions of movie stars and exciting things, and it just didn't work out. So my mother was very negative, and that was an important role in my life, because her being very negative meant that I had to develop some kind of shield or some kind of protection against all the negativity, because she said many times, you're likely to be a womanizer like your father, although he wasn't really. He just probably stayed at the office party too long, and I remember once he came home with lipstick on his collar, and that was not a good thing. But on the other hand, my father was positive. I had this vision when I was a little boy, and the vision was, by the time I was age 12, I found myself that I was the mayor of the junior high school, and I became 10th grade representative. Then I became student body president at my high school in La Jolla, California. So I felt that I was able to express leadership ideas and command the respect of people who respected my ideas about life. And so when I was 12, I had a recurrent dream. And that dream or vision occurred over and over again, and I'll share it with you briefly. I dreamed that I was standing in a big, beautiful hall, and it had a big chandelier overhead. It was some kind of stage. And I was on stage in a tuxedo, and here I was doing this at age 12, and I was looking out at the audience. And there in the front row were my mother, my father, my grandmother, and my aunt, great aunt and great uncle. My mother especially was disappointed that I wasn't more ambitious than me, maybe a movie star, or didn't have great, grand ambitions. And she kept telling me I was going to grow up like my father. She kept saying that I wasn't special like other people. And she kept comparing us with other people. And I remember that I did something on stage. I don't remember what it was. It could have been singing. It could have been acting. It could have been something that I was being featured. And the audience rose after I finished whatever it was I was doing and gave me a standing ovation. And my mother and father stood up, and I remember my mother looking at me and me looking down at her, saying at the age of 12 to myself in my dream, am I a good boy now? Am I good enough now? Am I okay now? Am I lovable now? Am I your good son now instead of your disappointing son now? And so I admit that when I was a little boy, I was trying to maybe get the approval of my mother. I was trying to get the approval of other people to make up for shall we say, a misguided or a fairly low self-esteem, a low feeling of worth, because my mother was always comparing and making other people seem more special than us. So there's probably no question that I was substituting, shall we say, a feeling of self-worth with having other people appreciate me and approve of me. And that's why I had that recurrent dream over and over again. And the answer to that story is that in the 1980s, after having written a number of books and having some success and becoming a platform speaker, I found myself in a big meeting room with a chandelier. It happened to be Carnegie Hall in New York. And I was wearing a tuxedo that night, I remember. And I was made Man of the Year by a nonprofit foundation that I was working for to help children find out their natural talents and become all they could be. And I was featured as Man of the Year, and the audience gave me a standing ovation for my 20-minute talk on servant leadership. And I remember looking at my mother, but of course, in the 1980s, she wasn't there. Neither were my father or my great aunt and great uncle or my grandmother, but in the dream, they were there when I was 12. And I remember in the 1980s when I was doing it, I wished my mother had been in the front row to see that I felt at that moment that I would have gained her approval. So I've had a vision all my life to be special, even though I was raised in a non-special family. And that's very important for people to have this vision or dream that they carry throughout their lives. And I continue to carry that. And my dream or vision is simply this. I want to be a person, a gardener, who plants shade trees for future generations under which I myself may never sit. And so I'm a gardener, like As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, somebody who is gardening in life and never gets the garden quite right because there's always something to come in to make the garden need tending. So I want to be a gardener who keeps tending and planting shade trees for future generations that I don't need to sit under. And I think my own immortality in that sense is simply the love and the servant leadership that I give to other people. But that's the vision that has driven my life. I have never thought about getting rich or being famous or having power or having the world adore me. I have tried to make up for a lack of self-esteem to get maybe the audience's approval. Maybe I've relished standing ovations. Maybe I've liked being photographed and that feeling of being special like everybody else. Maybe I've had some little teeny piece of narcissism, but in my opinion, hardly any, because I'm not interested in myself. I'm interested in what value I have within, what God-given ability I have that I can make the world a little better for having lived. And that's why every birthday of mine throughout my life and throughout my mother's life, she lived to be 97, so she lived until I was in my 70s, my middle 70s. So D-Day is very special. June 6th is my birthday, so every birthday I would bring my mother a long stem rose in a vase with water and give it to her. And she said, "That's really silly. Why would you give your mother a present on your birthday?" I said, "Because, Mom, I want to thank you for giving me life, for making it possible for me to be alive, for bringing me into the world. Thank you so much." And she was overwhelmed that I would, on my birthday, give her a rose because, that's the way I look at it. The gift of life is so precious, and I love life to the extent that I I'm so passionate about living and help other people live a good life that I spend virtually all of my time thinking about and doing things to make life better for everyone and everything that I touch. And that really is my long-range passion and vision for life.